At Thanksgiving, my father raised his glass and said, "To the kids who actually made something of themselves." He looked right past me. My daughter put down her fork and asked, "Grandpa, who do you think pays for this house?" My father holds a glass with two hands. He has done it since 2019, when he had a thing that was not a stroke but was close enough that they kept him in for 4 days. And now when he lifts anything, he brings his elbows in like a man carrying something downstairs. He got about 2 inches of air under it. He said the line, and his eyes went along the table left to right the way they always do, and they stopped on my sister, and then they went past me and landed on the window. Not through me, past me. There is a difference, and I have had 12 years to learn it. And then Nell put her fork down. She is 11. She puts a fork down the way you would set down something breakable, which is a thing she got from her mother and not from me. She put it flat on the edge of her plate, and she said it in a completely ordinary voice, the voice she uses to ask what time we are leaving. "Grandpa, who do you think pays for this house?" Nobody said anything. My aunt's husband did that thing where he laughed at half volume to see if it was a joke and then stopped. And my father, 71 years old, 38 years on the line for the power company, a man who has never in his life been asked a question he did not have an answer to, looked at my daughter and answered her honestly. He said, "Your aunt does," and he meant it. That is the whole thing. That is the entire 6 years, right there in 3 words said by a man in complete good faith at his own dinner table. He was not lying to her. He was reciting. The mortgage on my father's house is $1,180 a month, and it comes out of my account on the 4th. It has come out of my account on the 4th since March of 2019. It does not go to the bank. It goes to my sister, and my sister sends it on, and every statement my father has ever looked at since 2019 has had her name on it. I set that up. Nobody did it to me. I want that at the top of this because there is a version of this story where I am a victim, and that version is not accurate, and I do not want it. In 2018, my father refinanced. He was 64 and about to retire, and the payment on the new note was $400 a month more than the old one. And he did it because a man at a kiosk in a bank branch told him he could take some equity out and do the roof. And he did the roof, and then he retired, and then the arithmetic arrived. He did not tell anybody. He got about 14 months into it, moving money around, taking money off the escrow, and then in February 2019, my sister found a past due notice in a drawer while looking for a phone charger. She called me. That is worth saying because of everything that came after. Sabine called me immediately that night, frightened, and the two of us sat on the phone for 2 hours working out what to do. I offered. He said no. I want to describe how he said no because it explains the rest of my life. I drove out on a Saturday. I sat at that table. I said, "Dad, I can cover the difference. I do fine. Tova and I have talked about it. It's not a problem." And my father said, "I'm not taking money off my son." Not angry. That is the thing people always assume, that it was a fight. It was not. He said it the way you decline a second helping. And then he asked me if I wanted to look at the truck because the alternator was doing something. I tried 3 more times over the next 6 weeks and got the same answer in 4 different shapes. And on the last one on the phone, he got quiet in a way I have only heard twice. And he said, "Gid, don't ask me again." So I stopped asking him, and I called my sister. Sabine is 3 years younger than me, and she has been the one he is easy with since we were children. That is not favoritism, or it did not start as favoritism. Our mother died when Sabine was 9 and I was 12, and something happened in that house in the 2 years after it, where my father and my sister got a language, and my father and I got a routine. He and I do maintenance. We have replaced 2 water heaters, a fence, and the entire back steps. And in 12 years of Saturdays, we have said perhaps 900 words to each other, most of them about hardware. He and Sabine talk on the phone, actually talk for 40 minutes about nothing. I know exactly when it happened too, which is the sort of thing you are not supposed to have kept. The autumn after our mother died, my father started taking Sabine with him on Saturdays. Not to do anything. She was 9. She sat in the truck. He would go to the yard, or to a job, or to the hardware place, and she would sit in the passenger seat with a comic, and he would buy her a bottle of something on the way home, and that went on for about 2 years. I was 12, and I stayed at the house, and I did the things. I made her lunches for school. I ran the washing machine badly for about 8 months before my Aunt Lucienne noticed and taught me. I signed a permission slip in 1997 with my father's name on it because he was on nights and I did not want to wake him, and I got away with it, and I did it maybe 30 more times over the next 4 years. Nobody asked me to do any of that. That is the thing. There was no conversation. A 12-year-old took over the running of a house, and the 2 other people in it simply adjusted, and nobody in that family has ever once mentioned it, including me, including now, including in a hospital room. So when people ask why I could not say one sentence at a dinner table, why a 41-year-old man with a mortgage and a wife and a decent job could not say, "Actually, Dad, it's me," the answer is that I have never said any sentence like that in my life. I was trained out of it in 1996 by a grieving man who did not know he was doing it, and I have been extremely good at it ever since, and I have raised a daughter who is not, which is the single best thing I have done. So when I said the money needed to come from her name, it was not a scheme. It was the obvious engineering solution to a problem. He would not take it from me, and he would take it from her, and the money was mine either way, and who cared. I said that out loud to her in April 2019. I said, who cares whose name is on it? She said, are you sure? I said, Sabine, he needs the house. That is the last honest conversation the two of us had about it, and it lasted about 90 seconds, and then it was set up, and then it ran for 6 years like a machine nobody looks at. For the first 2 years, it was nothing. I want to be truthful about that, because it would be very easy now to write it as though I was quietly bleeding the whole time. I was not. For 2 years, it genuinely did not bother me. I would see the transfer go out on the 4th, and I would think about it for about 4 seconds and then think about something else. The first time I felt it was Christmas 2021. My father was talking to a neighbor who had come in for a drink, and the neighbor said something about how hard it is for older people now, and my father said, well, I've got a daughter. That was all. 4 words. And I stood by the counter with a beer I did not want and felt something move in my chest that I did not have a name for. The second time was worse and smaller. Summer 2022, and my father was telling my uncle about the new water heater, which I had installed on a Saturday in July in a basement that was 91 degrees. And he told the story right. He said Gid put it in, and then he said Sabine got the good one. She did not get the water heater. I got the water heater. It cost $1,100 and I paid for it and I carried it down those stairs. But by then, in his head, money that arrived at that house had a name attached to it, and the name was hers, and he was not doing anything dishonest. He was applying a rule that had been true for 3 years. I did not correct him. Not once. Not that day. Not the next 400 times. Every single time I decided not to correct it, I told myself the same 3 things. That it would embarrass him, that it would embarrass her, and that it did not matter. The first 2 were true. The third one stopped being true somewhere around 2022, and I did not notice. Because there is no moment when a favor turns into a verdict. It happens the way rust happens. I can give you the ledger of it if you want. I have one, which is itself the problem. Easter 2022. My father telling my cousin's husband that Sabine keeps an eye on things for me now. The 4th of July, same year, a conversation about a neighbor going into a home, and my father saying, well, I'm lucky. I've got one that looks after me and one that turns up. That is the exact sentence. One that looks after me and one that turns up. He said it at a picnic table with a paper plate in front of him, and he did not mean it unkindly, and I sat 8 feet away with a beer and said nothing. November 2022, the fence. $280 of posts and a Saturday, and Sabine came by at 4 with a bag of donuts. And at dinner, my father told my aunt that Sabine had brought donuts. March 2023, he changed the beneficiary on a small life policy. $15,000, split evenly before, and he told me himself casually that he had put it all to Sabine because she's carrying the weight. I said, sure, that is the one that keeps me awake. Not because of $15,000, because I said sure in a kitchen, standing up, and then went home and paid the mortgage on the 4th. And then 2024, when Tova's hours got cut, and we had a genuinely thin 8 months, and I did not tell my father about it, because I could not say the sentence, money is tight, to a man who believed I gave him nothing. It would have sounded like a complaint about a thing I was not doing. So my wife and I did not take a holiday, and Nell did not do the trip with the school, and my father asked me in September why we had not gone anywhere, and I said work was busy. That is what the third thing costs. It does not matter, until it is the reason your kid is not on a coach to Washington. Here is what my sister did, and I want to be careful because it is smaller than people expect, and it is also the whole thing. She edited the memo line. The transfer left my account with the memo G. Marsh, mortgage, because that is what I typed in 2019, and it autofills. And the transfer that left her account went out with the memo family. That is it. That is the entire fraud. One word. She did not take money. Not a dollar, not once, not ever. I have looked, and Tova has looked, and there is nothing. Every cent I sent went where it was supposed to go on the day it was supposed to go there for 6 years. What she took was the memo line. And I understand why, or I understand enough of why. In 2019, our father started talking to her about money, which he had never done with either of us. He asked her advice. He rang her about the escrow. In 2020, he told her he did not know what he would have done, and she cried in her car about it, and she told me that at the time, and I was glad. She was 32, and for the first time in her life, her father was looking at her the way he had always looked at me, as somebody load-bearing. She did not decide to steal that. She just did not correct it either. And then she made one small edit so that the correction would not happen by accident, and then she made another, and each one was so small that she could tell herself it was nothing. We are the same person, my sister and I. That is the part that took me longest. Thanksgiving was at his house. It is always at his house. 19 of us, 3 tables, the good chairs and the folding chairs, and Tova doing the potatoes because my father has not let anybody else do the potatoes since 2011, and Tova is the only person he has ever let do anything. Nell had been in the office in the morning looking for a photograph. That is all it was. She wanted a picture of her grandmother, a specific one from a beach that she remembered seeing in a frame when she was small, and my father told her to look on the computer, in the folder, which he has told 40 people to do because he has no idea what is in it. The folder is called Grandpa. My sister made it in 2019 to keep the statements in. An 11-year-old with a laptop in 40 minutes went through it the way an 11-year-old goes through anything, which is to say completely and with without any concept of privacy, and she came out and sat down at the table and ate her dinner and said nothing for 2 hours. I did not know that at the time. I found out at 9 o'clock that night in a car. So at the table, when she asked the question, I genuinely thought, that my daughter was defending me on instinct, the way a kid does when they see their dad get skipped over in a toast. I put my hand on her arm, and I said, "Nell," and she looked at me and she was not upset, and she said, "I'm asking Grandpa." My father said, "Your aunt does," and Sabine, 4 seats down, said, "Dad," which was, I think, the only thing she could have said, and which was also the exact wrong thing, because it was a warning, and everybody heard it as one. Nell said, "It's just that on the statements it says," and my sister said, over the top of her, loudly, in a voice I have never heard her use with a child in her life, "Nell, you shouldn't be going through other people's files." 19 people at 3 tables. My daughter went red from the neck up and put her hands in her lap and did not say another word for the rest of the meal, and my father said, "What statements?" and my aunt asked somebody to pass the beans, and the whole thing closed over the top of it the way these things do. I sat there and I did not say anything. I want to slow this down because it took about 9 seconds and I have spent a year in it. The room did not go silent. That is what films get wrong. 19 people at 3 tables do not go silent. They go patchy. The far table kept going. My cousin's kids were doing something with a napkin and never noticed anything at all. The middle table stopped. My Aunt Lucienne, who is 78 and misses nothing, put her glass down without drinking from it and looked at my sister and then at me and then back at my sister, and I watched a woman in her 70s solve the entire thing in about 4 seconds and decide to say nothing about it for the rest of her life. Tova had a serving spoon in her hand. She looked at me, not at Sabine, not at my father, at me, and there was a question in it, and the question was, now, and it was the closest my wife has ever come to telling me what to do at a family table in 14 years. And I did the thing I have done 400 times. I picked up the gravy and asked my uncle whether he wanted any. That is what I did. My daughter was sitting beside me the color of a brick with her hands in her lap, having just been publicly accused of snooping for telling the truth, and I asked a man about gravy. 6 years, 400 opportunities, and my 11-year-old daughter takes one shot at it and gets shouted at in front of 19 people, and her father sits there with his hands on either side of his plate and says nothing. I have apologized to her for that twice. She says she does not remember it being a big deal. She is lying, and she is doing it kindly, which she also gets from her mother. We drove home at 9. Tova drove. Nell was in the back with her hood up. About 10 minutes out, she said from the back seat, "Dad, is Aunt Sabine paying for Grandpa's house?" I said no, and Nell said, "Okay, that's what I thought." Then she said, "There's a statement from 2020 that has your name on it. July 2020. One statement out of 70-something, and it is not even from the bank. It is a screenshot Sabine took of the transfer confirmation and put in the folder in the first month before she had worked out what she was doing, and it has the memo line on it. G. Marsh, mortgage. Everything after that in that folder says family." I sat up until 2 in the morning with a laptop at my own kitchen table going through 6 years of my sister's filing, and I want to tell you that I felt vindicated, and I did not. What I felt was seasick, because there it was, in order month by month, a person's character changing at a rate of about 1 word a year. The first 4 months, screenshots with my name on them, then a gap. Then, from December 2019, a different format. She had started saving them as PDFs from her own bank, which showed her account and not mine. She had not deleted the 2021. She had just missed it once in 71 months. I looked at that file for a long time, and the thing I kept coming back to was that if I had ever once said a sentence out loud, at any point in 6 years, none of this exists. Deb Sillenpaugh has been doing my father's taxes for 24 years out of an office above a carpet showroom. She is the one who broke it, and she did it entirely by accident in January with a question about gift reporting. My father had mentioned in passing, in the way he mentions things, that his daughter had been helping with the house, and Deb, who is thorough in the specific way of a person who has been audited once in 1998 and has never recovered, asked him for a number. He gave her a number. $11.80 a month, 6 years. She said that was about $85,000 and asked whether there was any documentation, because at that level there are forms. And then she looked at the account it was arriving from, because he had brought the statements in a plastic bag the way he brings everything. And she asked the question that a tax preparer asks, which is not a question about feelings. She said, "Wendell, is this coming from one person or two?" Because the amounts landing in his account had, for 6 years, arrived on the 5th, and Sabine's own outgoing transfers, the ones in her records, went out on the 5th. But the money had entered her account on the 4th from somewhere else, and Deb Sillenpaugh had 24 years of looking at the shape of things. She did not say a name. She had no name. She simply asked a 71-year-old man a technical question that could not be answered without one, and then she waited, the way people do. My father said he would find out. I know all of this because I went and saw her in March, after everything, and asked her to walk me through it, and Deb Sillenpaugh poured me a coffee out of a machine that has been in that office longer than my daughter has been alive, and told me the whole thing in about 6 minutes without once asking why I wanted to know. At the end, she said, "Can I say something?" I said, "Sure." She said, "In 24 4 years, I have never once had a family fall out over a form. It's always about the form. It's never about the form. Then she said the thing that made me sit in my truck outside a carpet showroom for a while. She said, your dad's brought me a plastic bag of paper every February since 2001. He's never once brought me anything he didn't understand. She capped her pen. He knew what he was bringing me. I said, you think he did it on purpose? And Deb Sillenpaw, 24 years, said, I think he brought a bag to somebody who has to ask. But I have gone round that about 400 times. Because it fits. It fits exactly. My father is a man who cannot ask a question and cannot accept help and cannot say thank you, and who has spent his whole life getting things done by putting them in the way of somebody who has no choice but to deal with them. He knew since 2021. He said nothing for 4 years. And then, in January, he took a plastic bag of statements to a woman who is professionally incapable of not asking, and he sat there while she asked, and he said he would find out. That is not a confession. My father has never made one of those. It is the closest thing to a confession that a man like that has available, and I did not recognize it for 2 months because I was looking for words. He did not call Sabine. He called me. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon in January and asked me whether I knew anything about the money. I had 11 seconds to decide, and I used all of them, and I said, you should talk to Sabine. I want to be honest about why. It was not loyalty. It was that I had spent 6 years constructing a position where I could not be the one to say it, where saying it would make me a man who had been keeping score, and I was not going to give that up on a Tuesday over the phone. He said, I'm asking you. I said, Dad, ask her. There was a pause, and then my father said, all right, and hung up. She asked for 3 weeks. She called me that night, and it was the first real conversation we had had since 2019, and it lasted 4 hours and included, from her, an amount of crying I was not prepared for and did not enjoy. She did not deny anything. She said one thing that I have thought about ever since. She said, I didn't know how to stop. There wasn't a day when I could have, which is true, and which is exactly what I would have said about not correcting him. I asked her about the memo line. That was the only thing I actually wanted to know, and I made her answer it. She said she changed it in the 4th month. I said, why? And she said, because he read one. He had asked to see a statement in the summer of 2019 because he wanted to check the escrow, and she had brought her laptop over, and she had sat next to him at that table while he read it, and my name was on it, and he had not said anything, and she had gone home and been sick. She said, I thought he hadn't seen it. I said, he saw it. She said, I know that now. Then she said the thing that stopped the argument I had been building for 4 hours. She said, Gid, why didn't you ever just say it? And I did not have an answer. I had 6 years of answers, and not one of them survived being said out loud to somebody at 11 o'clock at night, because it would embarrass him, because it would embarrass you, because it didn't matter. She said, you liked it. I said, don't. She said, you liked being the one who didn't need saying. You've always liked that. You did it with Mom's funeral, you did it with the roof. And I hung up on my sister at 51 minutes past 11 because she was right, and I did not want to be in a phone call where she was right. I called her back 20 minutes later, and neither of us mentioned that I had hung up. She asked for 3 weeks to tell him herself, properly, in person, at the right moment. She took 11. I let her take 11. That is worth saying too. I could have counted at 3, at 5, at 8. I did not send a single message about it. I watched the weeks go past with a kind of interest, the way you watch a batsman on a bad wicket. And if you asked me now why I let it run, I would tell you I was being patient, and the truth is closer to something else. For 11 weeks, my sister was the one with the thing she could not say. I had been carrying that for 6 years, and I put it down, and it was the best I had felt since 2019, and then my father went out to move the bins. And in the 11th week, my father went out at 7 in the morning to move the bins and went down on the ice at the bottom of the driveway. He was on the ground for about 20 minutes before the neighbor saw him. Broken hip, and then a cardiac event in the ambulance, and 4 days in a unit at St. Albans before they moved him to a step-down. Sabine told him on the 5th day. I was not in the room. She asked me not to be, and I said fine, and I stood in a corridor outside room 4 with a vending machine coffee and my back against the wall for 11 minutes. When she came out, she had her coat over her arm, and she did not look at me, and she said, he wants you. He was propped up. He had those socks on. There was a whiteboard on the wall with a nurse's name on it and the date, and somebody had drawn a small sun next to it. He said, sit down, Gid. I sat down. And my father, 71 years old, 4 days after a cardiac event, said, I've known since 2021. I said, what? He said the bank sent a duplicate escrow notice in the spring of 2021 to an old address, the house on Ferris he sold in 2016, and the people living there sent it back with a note, and it came to him in an envelope with somebody else's handwriting on it, and on the notice in the payer field was a name, not Sabine's. He said, it sat on the counter for about a week. I said, Dad, and he said, I didn't ask because if I asked, I'd have to know. I said, 4 years. He said, yes. And then he did something I have never seen my father do, which is that he explained himself, unprompted, at length, without being asked a single question. He said that in 2019, when Sabine found the notice, he had lain awake for 3 nights not because of the money, but because of the kiosk. Because a man in a blue polo shirt at a folding table in a bank branch had sat him down and taken him for $400 a month, and he had signed it, and he had been proud of himself in the car car on the way home. He said, 38 years I never missed a payment on anything. He said the thing that finally made it make sense, which was, if it comes from your sister, it's family. If it comes from you, it's a bill. I said, that's not, and he said, I know what it is. I'm telling you what it felt like. Then he said, you'd have never brought it up. Not once. Not at a funeral. Not drunk. Not in 40 years. I know that about you. He was looking at the ceiling. That's not a compliment, Gid. That's the same thing I've got. Your mother used to say we were the two quietest men in one body. The machine down the hall did the noise it does. He said, I let her have it because it was easier for me. Not for her. For me. And that is the closest my father has ever come, or is ever going to come, to the actual sentence. There is a thing about my father that I have understood since I was about 14, which is that he would rather be wrong than be helped. He did not toast my sister at Thanksgiving because he loved her more. He toasted my sister because toasting my sister was the only way to keep from saying thank you to me, and saying thank you to me would have meant admitting that in 2019, a man at a kiosk in a bank branch got him for $400 a month and his son had to catch him. 4 years of favoritism performed at me at every holiday by a man who knew exactly what he was doing and could not do anything else. I said, you let me sit there. He said, yes. I said, you let her sit there. And he said, that's the part I'm sorry about, which is not the same as being sorry about the first part, and both of us noticed, and neither of us said anything. The mortgage went back into my name in February, openly, with my father's signature on a form and no ceremony at all. Sabine pays $400 a month toward it. Nobody asked her to. She started in March and has not missed one, and none of us have ever discussed it, and I have decided that this is a family in which the discussing is done by direct debit. My father said thank you once. In a car park at St. Albans in February, badly. He said, that was a lot of years, which is not the words, and I said, it's fine, Dad, which is also not the words. And then we talked about the alternator. We still do the maintenance. We did the back gutters in April. Nell asked me in the spring whether she had made everything worse. I said no. I said she had asked the only honest question anybody had asked at that table in 6 years, and that the reason it landed like a grenade was not because it was a grenade. It was because 19 adults had been sitting on a room full of them and calling it Thanksgiving. She thought about that for a while. Then she said, Grandpa still hasn't told anyone though, has he? And I said no. She picked her fork back up.